Our next speaker is Madam Mariela Volcovich for the Argentine Consenso for Peace, Israeli-Palestinian peace. She focuses on youth. She has broad experience working with vulnerable groups. She was the executive director of the Rabbinical Studies of Latin America, working with the Anne Frank Center in Argentina. We are pleased to have her with us. Ma'am, you have the floor.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank everyone, and specifically I'd like to thank those who organized this event for taking this initiative, and of course the members of the United Nations for inviting us to participate. And it's a great honor to be in the presence of all of you. My name is Mariela Volcovich. I'm a psychologist. I'm Jewish. I am a member in a number of different institutions and organizations in the Jewish community. Today I'm here to represent which is the Argentine Consensus for Israeli-Palestine. Before I begin my speech, which is very brief and it's really because I understand that ambassadors and others who are responsible for implementation of policies and political action in representation of your respective countries. When one belongs to an organization, in society, a religious organization, as Professor Falcon just said, especially when you belong to an organization that relates to the many variables that have an impact on one's identity, one's path of identifying with that. At different times, I have represented different organizations. For instance, I was the executive director of the Rabbinic Latin American Center. And it's given me a range of experiences, but it's also limited me to my participation in a given organization. For example, the one which I belong to today and represent today, and which I'm proud of. And we should say that very often, in most cases, when one is working with the goodwill of members of civil society, and these are not necessarily people that occupy positions of responsibility or who are even there representing a given organization. When one works with this kind of people, one realizes the potential each of these people carries. And to join into what we're doing now here in a very incipient manner. Here I'm not speaking on behalf of anyone necessarily. The initiative for Palestinian-Israeli peace is a regional initiative which is established for free men and women who come together of their own free will to join efforts in order to build peace, to promote reconciliation and development between Palestine and Israel. We established our organization with the firm belief that civil society can identify or use this conflict as an opportunity to promote value, respect, and inclusion of differences and others, and to find a non-violent solution to conflicts in a democratic, fair, and equitable manner. This initiative seeks to mobilize the synergies of the Arab and Jewish communities in different countries of Latin America, so they can join in multi-track diplomatic efforts generated around the region to work through dialogue, to address the Israeli-Palestine conflict and the needs of the two states. Our beginnings as a group of cousins very much related to the challenge before us, a challenge that arose with the conflict between Palestine and Israel in 2006, the press at that time in Argentina that was covering the situation were already covering antagonism that existed and which showed that the conflict was being imported to Latin America. And the idea behind that was, well, why not export our model of living together back to the Middle East? The catalyst of all this was Professor Eddie Kaufman. He brought a number of us together, and we got to know each other a bit, and he thought that perhaps we could create what we now call the consensus. And that's something for which we'll be eternally grateful, of course. Amongst our specific goals, we have the creation of spaces for the purposes of training within Arab communities and Jewish communities to promote education in Argentina, that promote a critical view of differences and understanding the common ground in our identities. This promotes value, especially when we realize that we have to fight against prejudice of ignorance. So working with educational communities in educational networks in the two communities is a great challenge. Not all of them are closed to dialogue, but there's just a lot of ignorance. Ignorance, which you will have no doubt observed, which is based on prejudice which is deeply rooted. We are trying to promote in the Arab Jewish communities in Argentina dialogue around being peace builders in the Palestine-Israel conflict, and we also promote their contribution to the efforts of peace and reconciliation. We are trying to create open spaces in Argentine society so that people can assume responsibility for building peace in the Middle East. We believe in the need for synergies to bring together different efforts towards dialogue in Israel and Palestine, and that we see taking place in Argentina. And of course, the idea is to extend that to all of the countries in the region. As Dr. Kaufman was saying earlier, the peoples of South America have within their societies large Arab and Jewish communities that populated our region throughout the end of the 19th century and the 20th century. And they have developed harmonious mechanisms for living together, but in preserving their bonds with family that live in the original territory, they're also, through family, linked to that land. And very often they adopt or assume positions which reflect what Professor Kaufman was just saying, what he calls long-distance nationalism. That feeling can lead to polarization and even violence, and makes the intercultural bonds that have been forged over the decades vulnerable. It can make them more tenuous and creates a third side in the dispute. This common phenomenon of diasporas created due to the host country or reference country's conflict leads to reduction and radicalization sometimes of the conflict in the host countries. So very often they have even more demands than those who are actually experiencing the conflict directly. A conflict such as the Israeli-Palestine conflict that's been marked by intolerance, war, rejection, a lack of respect and inequity between the two peoples leads to a political and social situation which is charged with hostility and enmity. This affects the relationship between the Arab and Jewish communities in the diaspora, both within and in the protagonists of the conflict. The idea is to overturn the negative influence and create an active role for the communities, taking advantage of their distance from the conflict so that they can serve as role models and open up a space for dialogue, for peace and justice in nonviolent terms. In that respect, we believe that we're going through a unique period which is very favorable for this kind of initiative. In just a minute, my cousin, Omar, will be talking about experiences right now that are taking place along those lines. At a critical moment in the history of the two peoples and in the conflict, there's also a moment for building. and growing international conviction at the governmental and social levels that South America has a role to play. And that role is to help international efforts bring about transformation in the conflict. That is validated by a number of different recent events, the recognition of the Palestinian state by countries in the region, the side-by-side initiative that Professor was talking about earlier, which brought together leaders and Jewish and Arab institutions throughout Latin America to work together in the context of multi-track diplomacy. The request on 2 opportunities of organizations in civil society, both for Palestinian and Israeli organization, with the Fernando Kirchner initiative to support mediation efforts between Gaza and the Israeli state. Civil society on both sides who are supporting the efforts of their respective governments for peace. We understand that it's of the greatest relevance to meet these demands at this historical moment in time, taking into account the fact that there have been many peace initiatives between Palestinians and Israelis, but bearing in mind also that very few have been focused on transforming the conflict, using new paths which would go beyond government-to-government negotiations and that would focus on people-to-people processes. All of these efforts are efforts where South America has been committed, but very often these efforts haven't been very systematic. We hope tomorrow morning we'll have time to present specific proposals from civil society about action, specific action that can be taken. Small action. Doesn't have to be huge gestures, big changes. We do not have the capability to resolve hunger for all mankind. It's not our responsibility to give everyone something to eat, but it is our responsibility to reach out so the one person can eat. 1 + 1 + 1 will bring about some kind of change. That is our desire. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Agradezco a la señora Volcovich.
I thank Madam Volcovich for that very important presentation. The people-to-people action that gives much food for thought. I like that sentence, and I think it's very practical in all senses of the word and can help us in our lives. And it's been a great pleasure to have you here, and we're very much going to take into account your observations.